In the early morning hours of July 7, 1985, Jane Anchor Hilton, a 54-year-old woman seeking refuge from a troubled marriage, was tragically found beaten and stabbed to death in a bedroom at her employer's house. The discovery was made by two fellow housemates and her own daughter, Autumn. The senseless murder left investigators puzzled, and the case remained unsolved for 14 long years until it was reopened by two determined detectives in 1999. Unfortunately, a misquote in an article led investigators to wrongly suspect Ricky Davis, who was eventually tried and convicted for the crime, despite maintaining his innocence throughout the process. However, refusing to give up, Davis sought assistance from the justice system that had incarcerated him. After 15 years, he was finally exonerated when the real killer was identified through genetic genealogy testing, thanks to the unwavering dedication of a group called the Innocence Project, who were committed to uncovering the truth. Jane was a well-known figure in El Dorado Hills, California, where she worked as a columnist for Foothill Times. She frequently covered social events in and around town for the newspaper and was a loving mother to her 6 children, often using poetry to inspire them. Additionally, she was working towards obtaining her real estate license and had been married to Archie Hilton since 1984. However, by July 1985, their marriage had begun to deteriorate, leading Jane to seek assistance from her employer, Wilma Klein. Wilma, who owned a spacious home in El Dorado Hills, graciously welcomed Jane and her youngest daughter, Autumn, into her residence on July 6, 1985. The house was already occupied by Wilma's daughter, Maureen Klein, her boyfriend, Ricky Davis, and his girlfriend, Connie Dahl. It was a bustling household, and little did Jane know that her first night there would tragically be her last. At 3:30 a.m., Ricky Davis and Connie Dahl returned from a party to find Autumn waiting outside, unaware of the horrific events that had unfolded within. She informed them that she had returned home late and was worried that her mother would be upset. All three entered the house and discovered blood in the hallway. As they entered Maureen's room, they found Jane Hilton's lifeless body covered in blood on the bed. Maureen and her boyfriend were away on a camping trip at the time. Ricky and Connie immediately called 911, but unfortunately, Jane was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigators started interviewing those who were close to Jane to gather more information. Archie Hilton, Jane's estranged husband, was questioned and provided detectives with an alibi and DNA evidence. Despite being a suspect due to their troubled relationship, Archie claimed that there was no animosity between them. After being cleared, the case went cold. Ricky Davis and Connie Dahl mentioned to investigators that they returned home in the early morning to find Autumn waiting outside. Upon entering, they discovered blood in the hallway leading to Jane's room, where they found her lifeless body. They suspected that an intruder might have been responsible for the tragic incident. The case remained unsolved for 14 years until it was reopened in 1999 by El Dorado County Sheriff's detectives Richard Strasser and Rick Fitzgerald. During their investigation, they came across a news article that led them to an interview with Connie Dahl, where she mentioned finding Jane's body positioned as if she were sleeping. This statement contradicted a previous statement made by Ricky Davis in an audio recording. Detective Fitzgerald mistakenly believed he heard him mention that the body was discovered on the floor. At that time, Dahl was serving a prison sentence in Oregon for unrelated charges. Detectives brought her in for questioning and initiated a 3-hour interrogation. Initially, Dahl stuck to her original account. However, over the next 18 months, she underwent 4 interrogations. Detectives were found to have employed tactics that could lead to a false confession. Dahl was coerced into incriminating Davis and Jane's daughter, Autumn, in the murder. She was threatened with a murder charge. On the condition that she cooperated, she would receive a reduced sentence for manslaughter and serve only a year. Detectives Strasser and Fitzgerald informed Dahl that DNA evidence would be used to track the suspect. In reality, no DNA evidence was introduced into the case during that time. Testing had not been conducted on the DNA recovered from the crime scene. By displaying crime scene photos and utilizing details from the crime, such as the bite mark on Jane's shoulder, investigators fed her the information they desired. Throughout the 4 interviews, Dahl began to crack. She started to recall details from the crime, enabling her to fabricate an entirely different version of events from the night of the murder. In one interview, Dahl claimed that Autumn was present during Jane's murder and got sprayed with blood. In another, she admitted to being the one who bit Jane on the shoulder. Dahl alleged that the murder began with an argument between Davis and Jane. She claimed that Davis wanted Autumn to accompany them to a party. When Jane refused, Davis flew into a rage, resulting in Jane's death. Her narrative evolved to align with the information provided. However, she could not recall the murder weapon or its eventual location. Dahl had accused her ex-boyfriend Davis of Jane Hilton's murder, making him the primary suspect. Ricky Davis and Autumn were interviewed separately after Connie Dahl confessed to the crime. Both Davis and Autumn maintained their original versions of events. Detectives attempted to deceive Davis by falsely claiming that Autumn had also implicated him in the murder. However, Autumn informed the detectives that she had no reason to protect Davis. Despite the detectives' efforts to manipulate them by threatening culpability, Davis and Autumn remained steadfast in their accounts. As a result, the detectives relied on Dahl's confession to apprehend Davis. Dahl was offered a plea bargain in exchange for testifying against Davis during his trial. The first trial ended in a mistrial, but Davis was eventually convicted in 2005 during his second trial. Dahl took the witness stand and recounted her struggle with Jane, accidentally biting her on the shoulder. She stated that she left the scene while Davis continued the brutal assault, hearing the victim's screams, pleas, and gurgling. Davis was sentenced to 16 years in prison for second-degree murder solely based on Dahl's testimony. Dahl, on the other hand, received a lesser charge of manslaughter and served a 1-year sentence in the county jail. Tragically, Dahl passed away in 2014 due to a drug overdose. Meanwhile, Davis persisted in proclaiming his innocence and sought assistance from the Northern California Innocence Project in 2006. He reached out to them in the hopes of proving his wrongful conviction. The Northern California Innocence Project, established in 2001 by Kathleen Ridolfi and Linda Starr, is a non-profit clinical program affiliated with Santa Clara University's School of Law. Upon Davis's contact with the project, his case underwent a comprehensive re-examination. The collaboration between the Northern California Innocence Project and the El Dorado County District Attorney's Office resulted in the retesting of DNA recovered from the crime scene. The post-conviction evidence, which included Hilton's nightgown and biological material under her fingernails, revealed an unidentified male DNA profile. Both the DNA from Hilton's fingernails and nightgown were determined to originate from the same source. As a result, Davis, Dahl, and Autumn were excluded as potential contributors. This discrepancy proved that Dahl's testimony contradicted the physical evidence and was likely fabricated. Furthermore, the DNA analysis confirmed Archie Hilton's innocence, although he had unfortunately passed away before the results were released. The obtained DNA profile was entered into the FBI Combined Index DNA system, but no matches were found. Despite the evidence supporting Davis's claim of innocence, there were still obstacles that needed to be overcome. The Northern California Innocence Project successfully argued that if the DNA results had been presented during Davis's trial, the outcome would have been different. However, until January 2017, the California standard required new evidence to unequivocally establish innocence, making it an extremely challenging threshold to meet. In 2015, Richard Leo, an expert in false confessions, reviewed transcripts of Dahl's interrogations and concluded that the detectives' methods were aimed at coercing Dahl into adopting a narrative that aligned with their preconceived notions about the murder of Jane Hilton. In 2016, the Northern California Innocence Project co-sponsored Senate Bill 1134, which allowed wrongfully convicted inmates like Davis to demonstrate that new evidence would likely have a significant impact on a jury. Melissa O'Connell, an attorney from the Northern California Innocence Project filed a petition for a new trial based on the new DNA evidence, with the testing conducted by former California State Senator Mark Leno. The legislation was approved in January 2017, aligning California's standards with those of 43 other states. In 2019, Superior Court Judge Kenneth Malikian overturned Davis's 2005 conviction and scheduled a new trial to commence in the fall of 2019. However, due to the defense attorney's health issues, the trial was rescheduled for April 2020. Unexpectedly, the trial's fate was altered once more. Breakthroughs in DNA testing resulted in Davis becoming the first person in California and the second in the United States to be cleared of a crime. Genetic genealogy, a novel DNA testing method, involves analyzing DNA evidence from a crime scene and submitting it to genetic companies. These companies then search family tree databases to identify potential matches. In February 2020, DNA evidence was linked to a man considered an unlikely suspect. El Dorado County Attorney Vern Pearson revealed in February 2020 that a new suspect had been identified as the individual connected to the DNA evidence found on Jane Hilton's body. Following the arrest, numerous individuals spoke to the media about the man known as Michael Green. Green, a longtime resident of Roseville, California, graduated from Oakmont High School in 1986. Described as easygoing, kind, even-tempered, and super chill, Green's classmates were shocked by the allegations against him. One classmate, who preferred to remain anonymous, expressed disbelief that Green could commit such a heinous act in El Dorado Hills. Reports indicate that Green was 17 years old at the time of Hilton's murder. On the night of July 6, 1985, the victim's daughter, Autumn, encountered Green and his friends, Calvin and Stephen, at the park. They spent time together before Autumn left to shower at home, allegedly informing her mother that she was going to a friend's house for the evening. Instead, she returned to the park to join the boys. The events that followed remain speculative. Investigators suspect that during this period, Green unlawfully entered the residence and encountered Jane, resulting in a struggle as she tried to escape. It is believed that Green may have attacked her in a state of frenzy. Subsequently, Davis, Dahl, and Autumn discovered Jane's lifeless body upon their return home. Prior to and following the murder, Green had no prior criminal convictions, leading to the assumption that he had lived a normal life until DNA evidence linked him to this horrific crime. The other two boys who were with Green were located shortly after his arrest. Unfortunately, Calvin had passed away some time ago, while Stephen was found and interviewed the day after the arrest. Stephen was treated as a witness rather than a participant. Green was apprehended on February 11, 2020, and due to his status as a teenager at the time of the offense, he made his initial appearance in a juvenile court on February 19, 2020. District Attorney Pearson explained that procedurally, the court had to follow certain steps within the juvenile justice system. Consequently, Green was granted a transfer to be tried as an adult. He endured a 2.5-year wait before his trial commenced. On July 29, 2022, Green entered a plea of no contest, thereby waiving his right to a jury trial. This plea meant that he would face a charge of first-degree murder without the opportunity to challenge the plea or its consequences. The sentencing date was scheduled for September 27, 2022, with Judge Suzanne Kingsbury presiding over the proceedings. During the sentencing, Dr. Elizabeth Kaufman, an esteemed professor in psychological science education, was called upon to provide expert testimony on adolescent development. Dr. Kaufman's research shed light on the unique emotional and cognitive needs of adolescents, particularly during the late adolescent stage. This stage is characterized by an individual's ability to comprehend right from wrong, albeit with diminished impulse control. The defense presented multiple witnesses from Green's past, some of whom maintained relationships with him well into adulthood. Each witness was questioned about their changed opinion of him following his confession. All witnesses expressed shock upon learning that he was responsible for Hilton's murder. Those who knew him in different capacities described him as cheerful, popular, humorous, and affectionate. These descriptors were used both before and after the tragic event. Green's ex-wife, Karen Green, stated, "There's simply no malice in Mike." Following the witness testimonies, each of Jane Hilton's children delivered their victim impact statements. They all detailed the irreparable loss caused by Green to their family. Heather Purvis McConnell, one of Jane's daughters, expressed, "The reasons behind it and the alternate life I could have had will haunt me forever." Artie the Brandon, Hilton's fourth child, shared, "I cherished my mother, and I assume Michael cherishes his mother as well. I wonder how he would feel or what he would say to the person who brutally attacked your mother 29 times. How would you react if you received a call early in the morning informing you of your mother's death?" The court listened to her emotional account of collecting her mother's belongings from the house where she was murdered. Arditha concluded with a poignant statement, "We will always share one thing, regret over the foolish decision you made 37 years ago." Ian, Hilton's son, echoed his sister's sentiments, describing the family's uncertainty and recurring nightmares, particularly after his sister Autumn was wrongly accused. Overwhelmed with emotion, he tearfully added, "No words can ever bring my mother back." Autumn, the last to speak, conveyed her deep anguish as she recounted the suspicion she had endured for the past 20 years. Recounting the events of that day, Autumn recalls the arrival of 2 detectives with crew-cut hair and thick mustaches at her house. They informed her that they had found the individuals responsible for her mother's death. However, instead of providing comfort and closure, Autumn found herself being accused repeatedly of biting her mother and assisting in moving her body. It was at that moment that Autumn realized the severity of the situation and uttered the word lawyer to protect herself from further intimidation by the investigators. Following this, Deputy District Attorney Jay Linden read a statement on behalf of the family. In the statement, he questioned Green about the brutal manner in which he ended Jane's life. Linden highlighted the numerous wounds on her head and face, mentioning Green's own admission of kicking her jaw and biting her shoulder. He emphasized that Green's actions not only took Jane's life, but also shattered the lives of many others. Linden further asked Green if he had ever considered who Jane truly was, pointing out her accomplishments and the love she had for her children. During the closing arguments, Margaret Husher, Green's defense attorney, argued that he was unable to control his actions due to his adolescent state of mind at the time. She stressed that he did not comprehend the wrongfulness of his actions. Husher based her argument on the testimony of expert witness Dr. Kaufman. She pleaded with the court to show mercy, citing various penal codes and court rules. However, Judge Kingsbury intervened, firmly stating that probation was not an option and effectively silencing any further defense comments. In response, Linden expressed gratitude to the court and condemned the application for probation as offensive. He believed that granting probation would be allowing Green to escape the consequences of his actions once again after already evading justice for 37 years. Judge Kingsbury acknowledged the numerous arguments surrounding adolescent development in murder cases, but did not entertain the idea of probation. She noted that after her 26 years on the bench, Jane Hilton's murder was the most brutal case she had encountered. Prior to delivering the sentence, Kingsbury humbly asked the family for forgiveness for the pain they had endured. Despite not being initially assigned to the case, she expressed her hope for the family's healing, as it would have been their mother's desire. Kingsbury then advised Green to utilize all available resources within the California Department of Rehabilitation. In conclusion, she emphasized to Green that he held the answers to the questions posed by the people. By doing so, it could potentially impact his parole outcome positively. Kingsbury highlighted that she had received positive feedback about Green from his friends, indicating his potential and the positive aspects of his character. She also mentioned that he was young enough to have a chance at a productive life upon release. Green was sentenced to 15 years to life and was remanded to the El Dorado County Jail with subsequent transfer to the California Department of Rehabilitation. The decision on restitution will be made following further deliberation by the court. Davis was released on February 13, 2020, and planned to celebrate with his family over pizza. His attorney, Melissa O'Connell, mentioned that he would be eligible for over $750,000 in state compensation for the wrongful conviction. While this amount was substantial enough for him to reintegrate into society and start anew, O'Connell acknowledged that it could never fully compensate for the lost years of freedom. Davis proceeded to file a lawsuit against the state seeking damages for the period from May 21, 2002 to February 13, 2020, amounting to $18 million. The lawsuit named El Dorado County, along with former detectives Richard Strasser, Rick Fitzgerald, Bill Wilson, deceased, being sued through his estate, and Larry Hennig. Additionally, Sheriff's Office pathologist Dr. Robert Anthony was included in the complaint. Reports from the Village Life newspaper indicated that Davis was homeless post-release. The lawsuit remains pending as of now. In 1974, a tragic and heartless murder took place, claiming the life of a remarkable young woman named Arles Perry. My deepest sympathies go out to her family and the entire community affected by this devastating loss. The loss of a daughter for her parents and a wife for her husband is truly heartbreaking. Our dedicated detectives have tirelessly worked over the years to bring justice to Arles and her loved ones. It is with great pride that I announce the resolution of this 43-year-old cold case. In October 1974, the Stanford University community in California was shaken by the brutal and sadistic killing of Arles Perry. As a newlywed, she had gone to the university's church one night to pray, but tragically, she never returned alive. For more than 4 decades, the case remained unsolved until advancements in DNA analysis finally revealed the identity of the killer. Arles Perry, originally from Bismarck, North Dakota, was the youngest of 3 siblings in her family. She had recently married her high school sweetheart, Bruce Perry, and together they moved to Stanford, California. Bruce was a sophomore pre-medical student at the university, while Arles worked as a receptionist at a nearby law firm. Both just 19 years old at the time, they could never have imagined the horrors that awaited them. On the night of October 12, 1974, Arles and Bruce had a disagreement while taking a walk on campus. Upset by the argument, Arles decided to seek solace in the church through prayer. She entered the church shortly before midnight and never returned home, causing great concern for Bruce. A search was conducted, but Arles could not be found in or around the church. The search came to a tragic end the following morning when a security guard discovered her lifeless body in the church at approximately 5:45 a.m. Arles was found lying on the floor, face up, in a spread eagle position. She had been strangled and subjected to molestation, a truly horrifying and disturbing crime. A tall candle had been placed in her private area, while another was forcefully inserted between her breasts. She was brutally attacked with an ice pick at the back of her head. The police observed no signs of a struggle at the crime scene. The security guard, Crawford, had securely locked the church shortly after midnight, as he noticed no suspicious activity inside. He even double-checked the doors around 2 a.m. and confirmed that they remained locked. However, when he arrived at the church at 5:45 a.m. to open it for the day, he discovered that the west side door had been forced open from the inside. The shocking state in which Arles was found left the authorities and her family pondering over the identity of the heartless perpetrator behind such a heinous crime. While every killer possesses some level of conscience and morality, this particular individual appeared to have no boundaries whatsoever. It seemed as though the act had been committed by a bloodthirsty and depraved creature. During the investigation, detectives discovered semen on a kneeling pillow near Perry's body, as well as a partial palm print on one of the candles. Initially, both Perry's husband, Bruce Perry, and the security guard, Crawford, were considered potential suspects. However, neither the semen nor the palm print matched either of them. The Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office also ruled out any connections between this murder and 3 previous killings in the area dating back to February 1973. Although Perry's husband was initially a suspect, he was eventually cleared of any involvement. Similarly, Crawford, much like the alleged Golden State Killer Joseph D'Angelo, did not raise significant suspicions among those who knew him. Crawford's landlord described him as a good-natured individual who never caused any trouble. While Crawford remained a suspect, there was no concrete evidence linking him to the crime at that point. However, he had not been completely ruled out. It is worth noting that at least 7 individuals were present in the Stanford Memorial Church on the night of October 12th and the morning of October 13th, including Perry and Crawford. After identifying 4 individuals, the 7th person remained unknown. A witness observed a young man with sandy-colored hair attempting to enter the church at midnight. He was described as having a medium build, standing at around 5'10" and not wearing a watch. In 1979, David Berkowitz, who was imprisoned for the Son of Sam murders in New York City, sent an intriguing book titled The Anatomy of Witchcraft to authorities in North Dakota. Inside the book was a message referencing Arles Perry, suggesting she was hunted, stalked, and slain before being followed to Stanford University in California. Maury Terry theorized that Arles was a victim of a satanic cult that trailed her from Bismarck to Stanford. David also reached out to Stanford police in 1981, claiming to possess information about the Arles Perry case. Detectives traveled to question him, but he provided no substantial details. The case remained unsolved and was periodically reviewed by the Cold Case Unit of the Santa Clara County District Attorney's and Sheriff's Office. Alleged ties to the cult were finally severed in 2018 when a breakthrough occurred. Utilizing advanced DNA technology, a new DNA sample from Arles's clothing was compared, leading to a match with security guard Stephen Blake Crawford. Crawford, residing in San Jose, California, was reportedly living off Social Security or retirement benefits. In June 2018, police visited Crawford's residence to execute a search warrant following the DNA connection. Upon their arrival, Crawford brandished a handgun, prompting the officers to retreat. Tragically, he took his own life by shooting himself in the head shortly after. Crawford had long been a suspect and had recently been interviewed by the authorities. During the investigation at his residence, the authorities discovered the torn sleeve of Maury Terry's book, The Ultimate Evil, and what they believed to be a 2-year-old suicide note written by Crawford after his interview with a detective. Although the motive remained unclear, Crawford was eventually connected to the crime nearly 44 years later. Regrettably, he passed away before he could face trial. This particular case received extensive coverage, including a detailed account of the John Gatroy murders in a February 2020 episode of Case File True Crime Podcast. The alleged connections between David Berkowitz and the Perry murder were also highlighted in the Netflix documentary The Sons of Sam, A Descent into Darkness.